Released in 2005, this incredibly important gem was beloved by so many to the point that it spawned a massive gaming franchise that has lasted up to this day. That's very impressive, especially since it's a Sony exclusive game. Sony seems to have an old yeller strategy with their franchises. Have fun for a few years and then, well, don't worry guys. Sly Cooper just got moved to a farm upstate. It's gonna be alright. But God of War is an exception to this. They couldn't take it to the farm if they tried. God of War is an enduring, impactful, revered, dare I say, prestigious franchise in the pantheon of gaming, and that's quite clear with the fantastic modern entries, both of which I've reviewed before. However, it all started with this simple little game on the PS2. Released the same year that... what the hell happened in 2005? Oh yeah, Angela Merkel was elected. Isn't that a strange thought, though? God of War remained at the head of a massive, powerful body for longer than Angela Merkel did. I mean, to be fair, Kratos did never have a crippling case of resemblance to the Kazoo Kid, so it was only a matter of time before he overtook her. So what exactly is the deal with the first God of War? Well, it's a very interesting game because in it, you aren't the God of War. You're fighting the God of War. Yes, the title actually refers to the villain of the series, which I think is pretty funny. Similar to how Zelda isn't the protagonist of most Zelda games, the God of War is not the protagonist in the original God of War, or at least not until the very end of the game. In fact, God of War shares a lot of similarities to the early 3D Zelda titles in other ways too, but we'll get to that in due time. First, how does the game look? Well, for a PS2 game from 2005, it's quite impressive. Sure, certain cutscenes are blurrier than a Britpop concert, but when you're actually playing the game, things look very good. I love the reflections and the little details that make certain areas so cinematic. It's quite important to bring this fantastical world to life. For example, in one of the coolest moments of the whole game where you climb into the dead carcass of a slain Hydra, the drops of saliva trickling across the tissue of the inside of its mouth and webs stretched between the slimy folds make it feel so real and visceral. The set pieces are very creative throughout most of the game, which helps it to look visually memorable and distinct. The entire opening, starting in the Aegean Sea, moving into the densely populated Athens, and then going into the Desert of Lost Souls, is truly remarkable because of its variety. However, it doesn't manage to exactly keep up that originally after the fact. Once you get to the Temple of Pandora, things sort of start to feel samey. I don't think it's that bad because this is the main portion of the game, and they do try to make each different segment of it somewhat unique, but it can still feel like a downgrade from the wildly creative first portion of the experience. I really like how they try to give each of the trials more of a deliberate elemental theming, but the temple does get a bit tiring after a while, and it left me wishing for some more segments and crazy set pieces akin to the desert or sea. The pacing of the game in general starts to take a hit here too. As I said, the first third of the game or so is fantastic, exciting, and a total blast. The second third is a little less inventive, but still solid due to constant switching between exploring, puzzles, and combat encounters. But in the final part, things start to become a total and utter drag. Once you finish getting done with all of the trials, you'd think you would finally gain access to Pandora's box and go on to fight Ares, but no, instead you have to traipse through the outside of the temple for around 45 minutes, dealing with some infuriating swarms of enemies, unfair puzzles, and the general feeling of, oh god, when is this finally going to end? This box puzzle in particular is a ridiculous scourge that I always dread. Hilariously though, it's not even the worst part of the game, because after retrieving Pandora's box and pushing it super slowly... Jesus, that's slow as hell. After getting the mythical weapon, Kratos is killed in a pretty shocking twist, and you must ascend out of the underworld itself, Hades. Hades is the most visually interesting and unique part of the whole game, and I do love that about it, but it's an absolutely awful level in terms of gameplay. Not only are the enemies kind of annoying here too, but the climbing up totems with spinning blades on them is simply infuriating. You will fall so many times on these things, mainly because there's not much to do in the way of strategy. It's just trial and error, which is commonplace in a lot of games, sure, but usually not right at the end of the game before the climactic battle that's been built up through the entire thing. And after dealing with a ridiculous amount of frustrating climbing, balancing, and fighting, it's finally over and you face off against the final boss. This is, visually and conceptually speaking, an awesome moment in the game. You grow to a massive scale and take on the god of war in an epic battle with the burning Athens in the background, as small as a rodent. It truly feels climactic and proper for an ending in terms of the idea behind it and the atmosphere which it induces. But it also displays some of this game's more deeply seated issues. Yes, there are some pacing problems and specific levels that aren't all that great, but I'd argue looking at the game's overall quality in terms of how it shifts, it's a success. The problem comes from some of the game's deeper aspects, mainly combat. God of War has some excellent presentation for the time, but its combat is something that should be a little less ephemeral, right? Well, it doesn't exactly reach the heights that I think it could, but it is a pretty great foundation for something better, similar to the 2018 game's combat compared to its sequel. You have two weapons, both of which are satisfying to use. Of course, the Blades of Chaos are more iconic, but the weight and impact of the sword is also incredibly fun, so they definitely gave Kratos a good arsenal, which also extends to the special abilities you unlock. 4 different magic abilities are given to you, all of which are awesome ideas. Raising an army of undead from Hades to fight by your side, summoning a circle of deadly electricity, throwing a lightning bolt as a projectile, and freezing enemies with Medusa's gaze. These are just genius and very fun to use throughout, which really helps the combat to remain enjoyable throughout nearly all of the game, despite it being somewhat mindless in some regards. Additionally, you can upgrade your weapons and all of these abilities, which adds a sense of discovery to them, giving you extra skills that you can use in relation to them, some of which are true lightsabers like the spin attack for the circle of electricity. These are even infused with some of the puzzles too. Most puzzles are somewhat simple but just made fun by requiring precise platforming, timing, or thinking outside of the box, while others are complete garbage like the ones where you literally just move boxes from one place to another very slowly. However, the best puzzle without a doubt is where you need to freeze an enemy with the Medusa gaze while they're on top of a switch, weighing it down and opening the door. It's awesome. The combat does have a lot of things going for it, but it's weighed down by some very specific things, just like the switch I just mentioned. First off, the blocking and dodging can feel unfair at points since you aren't really rewarded that well for timing your block properly, meaning it feels as if you can sometimes just hold in L1 for multiple seconds and be fine, whereas other enemies strike so quickly that it's hard to even react, especially with the lack of proper indication through attack animations. And speaking of unfair and finicky, the damn QuickTime events are the bane of my existence. Sure, these are very, very common in games even today, but God of War 2005 has some of the most annoying and frankly bratty ones I've ever suffered from. You might be wondering why I just said bratty. Well, it's probably because these are unreasonable, spoiled little idiots in QTE form. Ones which punish you for not responding within what feels like less than a second to certain prompts. It got to the point where I never even did these and just kept hitting the enemy. It takes about just as long and you don't fail and lose health as a result. I don't know why they made these as annoying and prevalent as they did, but it sucks, especially with this accursed boss fight. The first boss fight against the Hydra is absolutely awesome. It requires some clever puzzle solving and takes place in an incredible set piece, then ending with bombastic spectacle and a satisfying death for the opponent. The final boss too is, well, we'll get to that, but the middle boss in the temple is a pretty huge letdown. The attacks it has are confusing and somewhat hard to avoid, which is also a problem I have with Ares, and you have to get a bunch of QTEs twisting the stick around perfectly to defeat him, which gets super annoying. The game forces you to use QTEs for a lot of stuff, such as attacking an awesome looking bull monster, shoving your blades into an enemy's mouth, or Whoa, what are you doing, Kratos? I think that's a crime, man. He's dead. Yeah, you could say that again. Kratos definitely looks like he got some head alright. Yikes. This game is a bit suspicious. Although at the very least this makes sense. I mean, Kratos was from ancient Greece after all. Yeah, one of the famous trademarks of this game is that there's a minigame in which you, watch a vase fall over. But wait a minute. The prompt is still there after you do it. Does that mean... Oh my god, Kratos. No wonder your skin is that particular shade of white. At the very least, though, this boss and the one against Ares are very cool looking, and the enemy design across the board is top notch, even if certain enemies are annoying as hell to fight. But no enemy is more annoying than the god of war himself, Ares. The first phase is not too bad. If you use all of your abilities, it's quite satisfying and challenging, even if it's not that unique compared to other fights throughout the game. The second phase is a bit overwhelming, but really cool and unique, having you fight against a ton of Kratos clones who are trying to kill Kratos' family. It's a really cool idea that connects to the story of the game and looks awesome too. But then the third phase is, frankly, garbage. It's a super cool setup once more, with Kratos using a giant sword that used to be a bridge and Ares growing these creepy spider limbs, but the actual fight is very frustrating with how Ares' attacks are impossible to dodge at points, specifically this little poof of fire and then the ensuing heavy hitter. It drains your health and also gives him health due to the tug-of-war style health bar of this part, which is also an interesting idea, but it's never explained why it is there, and so it's kind of unnecessary feeling. But eventually you beat him and take your place as the god of war, which is a very satisfying and iconic ending. This ending caps off what is, to be honest, a really good story too. It follows Kratos' guilt over killing his family in a fit of rage and his quest for retribution against Ares. It's very compelling and is done justice by the gradual reveal of what exactly he did, as we're only told he's guilty about something at the start, and the actual reveal is very impactful and works well. There isn't a ton to it by modern standards, but for 2005, this is a phenomenal story with an incredible complex leading character and good themes about guilt and greed, specifically showing that a lust for power can destroy everything, which is very accurate and poignant, especially from a war-oriented historical perspective. So yeah, the original God of War may not be perfect or anything, but it's got a lot going for it. The combat is fun for most of the game, even if some fine-tuning would have made it truly great. The pacing is phenomenal for parts of the game, and even if the ending gets frustrating, the difficulty is much more well-balanced than lots of other games from the time. The scale, the spectacle, and visual prowess of everything is truly astonishing, and the story is incredibly effective. Just like its main character, this game is flawed in many ways, but has become an enduring force in gaming and is undoubtedly important. Somewhere past Kratos' murderous past, there's a good man, and somewhere past this game's handful of annoying fights, puzzles, and time-induced flaws, there's a truly good game. 3.5 out of 5. After the first God of War game was more successful than I bet anyone truly anticipated, a sequel was quickly called into order and released in 2007 on the PS... The PS2? Yeah, even though the PS3 had already been out for a few months, the second God of War game was released on the previous generation. I mean, it makes sense. It had a much bigger install base and probably started development too early to be fully dedicated to being on the PS3. I mean, it's not like the God of War devs would ever release a smaller scale game in the series on last-gen hardware when it very clearly could have and should have been released on a brand new PlayStation console at the time, especially due to its short length. That would just be crazy of them. But how does God of War 2 stack up as a game? Well, for a PS2 release, it looks absolutely stunning. This This is the best looking PS2 game I've ever played without a smidgen of competition. Everything looks absolutely gorgeous and so many of the intricate levels are perfect for immersing you in this fantastical world of Greek mythology. It feels like much more cohesive of a world as a result, which just makes it more fun to play too. The gameplay looks seriously incredible. I was constantly amazed by what they were able to pull off in 2007, and you know what? I'm just gonna say it. This honestly might look better than the big PS3, Xbox 360, or Wii games of that year in my opinion. Sure, Uncharted 1 and Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction both had fancy shiny HD graphics, but for style and vision, God of War 2 is an absolute masterpiece visually. And that's when you're actually playing the game. We also have quite a few cinematic CGI cutscenes sprinkled in there too, and these are unbelievable. These are legitimately jaw-dropping with their spectacle, beautiful color palette, and awesome fantasy imagery. The game's a looker throughout, and this helps the combat too actually. It's now more clear where you are, where enemies are, when attacks land, and just what the hell is going on, mainly because backgrounds and enemies don't blend in that much anymore. The first game kind of got repetitive and frustrating around halfway through, but this one doesn't do that at all. I didn't find myself bored once through the entire experience, mostly due to the absolute crap ton of new stuff they've added here. Like seriously, the first game looks like a demo of this one in comparison. The length isn't that much more since this game took me just over 8 hours, whereas the first one took a bit over 6, but it's about quality over quantity here. First of all, combat has been tweaked to a great degree, with dodging and blocking being far more instantaneous and reliable, which prevents frustrating losses of health from being so common. It feels a lot more dictated by the player's proper timing and skill, rather than like a crapshoot if an attack hits you or not. This makes things flow so well too, since you can attack the enemies far more quickly and with a much better sense of motion without worrying about suddenly getting hit and losing your whole combo. These changes are made even greater with the introduction of the Golden Fleece, which allows you to retaliate after blocking an attack with great timing, something that the last game was sorely missing. This is great for combat, allowing you to feel like timing is more important and rewarding, but it's also used very creatively for puzzles and boss fights, which I simply adore. Other minor things have been tweaked too. For example, you can now slide down walls quickly, jump up ladders, and swing yourself across ropes, which are all so much faster than the mind-boggling slog that was present in the last game's lame platforming. It's impossible to go back to that after experiencing this. It's that good. As a result of all these changes, the game is a very refined and fun experience through and through, which alone is the mark of a good game, but it's, as I said, the new stuff added that makes this game a good sequel as well. First, we have the ability to slow down time in certain areas for specific puzzles. It's not as in-depth as the time manipulation mechanics of other games or anything, but it's still very fun and used creatively near the end of the game. There are also now 2 different secondary weapons, a hammer and a spear. Now I think the hammer kinda sucks since it's clunky and you can't dodge it all while using it, making it kinda useless for most of the fights in the game. However, the spear is truly incredible. It flows so well, it's so satisfying to use, and it honestly feels like a clear precursor to Draupnir from God of War Ragnarok, which is also a stellar weapon. The new magic spells are also pretty cool too, with a more upgraded version of the Medusa Stare that can fire out quicker blasts of the gaze to freeze enemies faster, the ability to set up multiple balls of electricity that, as you upgrade them, link together and explode when disappearing, which allows for massive combos, a powerful stomp helpful for clearing out lots of enemies at once, and a bow that's used quite well for projectile combat and puzzles early in the game. And this is without even getting into the Icarus wings, which allow you to glide after jumping, and the ability to grapple onto things with the Blades of Chaos, both of which add so much mobility compared to the last game, which didn't really have mobility at all. I wish they had used these wings for a few more platforming segments, since it reminds me a lot of the old Spyro games and how you need to use gliding strategically, but when they do let you use it, it's really cool and adds a lot to the game's feeling of adventure. We also have these new levels where you ride on a Pegasus that change up the formula quite a bit, and though it's a bit weird how they just flat out disappear after around 2 hours into the game, they're really fun and visually interesting nevertheless. All of these additions are really welcome, especially due to how they come up in such quick succession, meaning the game is constantly offering a new and exciting change, constantly giving you new things to explore, constantly changing how you view your surroundings, especially with regard to the amazing puzzles. Even the more frustrating puzzles in this game have clear methods to them that make you feel like it was your fault, not the game's, for dying. There is no equivalent to the idiotic spy room with the stone block. Instead, there are some genius puzzles such as the room with the Phoenix statue, which will be the example I'll use to illustrate how good this game's puzzles are. So essentially you have to climb up onto the ceiling, destroy these icicles to reveal beams of light below, then destroy one of the walls frozen in ice to reveal a mirror statue, which you then move around until finding a beam of light that, in combination with the mirror, beams the light down into the chamber with the frozen statue. Then, you turn the emblems around the statue until the reflective one is in just the right spot, which reflects the light and melts the ice around the statue. Absolutely incredible. And this continues over to many of the boss fights too. Some of these are short and basic like Theseus or Icarus, but then you have some absolutely incredible fights too, such as the one against Perseus, where you have to keep track of the splashes he makes in the water to find him due to his invisibility. There's also the Kraken, where you really aren't told what to do at all, but you'll find it out by a clever recalling of the knowledge you gained throughout the game. You'll see that hitting the tentacles of the Kraken makes it lift them up, revealing a button, and since you've previously placed corpses on buttons to keep them down, that logically follows. This opens up a vent, which you also used before with the wings to fly, and then in the air you'll notice a scar in the Kraken's head, which is where you need to attack. It's very clever and subtle. The Colossus of Rhodes, where you need to climb into its insides and gradually destroy it, the Gorgon, whose gaze needs to be reflected back onto her to deal damage, or the disgusting Glob, who I can't show because it has like 900 nipples, where you need to solve puzzles to position spikes over its hands, and then let them down when the hands are in the right spot. These are all great highlights as well. But the clear highlight is easily the Sisters of Fate, where you already start off with a tense but in-depth battle against one of them, leading into an awesome subversive twist where you have to prevent them from destroying or altering your past and making you the one who lost the fight at the end of the first game, and culminating in an awesome final phase against both at once where you have to figure out how to trap one of them in the mirror and shatter it while time is slowed down. This is clearly a very well thought out battle, and it's truly unforgettable. It's definitely my favorite boss fight out of these classic God of War games so far, and I'd say it's my third favorite overall, only behind Nidhogg and Gna from Ragnarok. In addition to the gameplay being an absolute blast that's constantly exciting, complex, and perfectly balanced, the story is pretty compelling too. Yes, it's kind of the same story of an angry white man going after gods who have wronged him, but it's the places it brings you to, and mainly the ending, that are so fantastic. You start off in Rhodes fighting against the Colossus, which is great for an opening area and quite stunning visually, then going to this icy cavern and fighting against an ice titan, as well as killing Prometheus, whose torment does a great job of building up Zeus as a villain, especially since this happens right after he kills Kratos, and Kratos is brought back by the Titans. After this, most of the game is spent on this island leading to the place where the Sisters of Fate live, but it's much more full of variety and awesome areas than the Temple of Pandora from the last game ever was. You go through a swamp, fighting a creepy zombified version of your old human opponent, fight against the Gorgon Queen after going through her temple, fight Perseus and Icarus, go through the stunning set piece that is the Titan Atlas, which is basically the fire level of the game, and finally fight through many challenges to get to the Sisters. This includes setting a phoenix free and riding it to their temple. That's the literal definition of badass. And it all culminates at the end quite brilliantly with the reveal that Zeus destroyed Sparta in Kratos' absence, serving as an effective motivation to go after him. The final fight against Zeus may have pretty annoying QTEs at the end, like, Jesus, that thing sucks. It may have that going against it, and it may not be as good as the fight against the Sisters of Fate, but it's climactic and satisfying as hell, and the ending hinting at a full-on war between the Titans and Olympians is easily one of the best cliffhanger endings in gaming history. Like, damn, this is how you do a game about gods and wars. God of War 2 is, without any doubt in my mind, one of the finest sequels in the pantheon of gaming. This is the game that truly proves the worth of God of War as the juggernaut franchise that it is today, and it's also one of the best PS2 games of all time. I could be a picky little nerd and say that because of these awkward and kind of hilarious audio glitches that I kept experiencing. I will only give it a 4.5, but this game is so damn good that I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and say that that only happens in the PS3 remaster, making it an astounding 5 out of 5. Truly a must-play. The first spin-off and the first portable entry in the franchise, God of War Chains of Olympus, was released in 2008, around a year after the previous title. What an astonishingly quick turnaround that is. Well, the reason for that is that the game was primarily developed by Ready at Dawn, who also made Daxter, which was just like this game insofar as it was a PSP spin-off of a beloved PS2 franchise, and later they made The Order 1886, which exists. The game follows a decent enough side story, which takes place before either of the mainline entries, instead being another tale of Kratos' servitude to the gods. This time he must save the god of the sun, Helios, from being captured, which has sent many other gods into a deep slumber. It starts out on the shores of Attica with you fighting a basilisk, which has a pretty awesome design but underwhelming boss battle, and Persian soldiers. That's right, the first enemies from another pantheon appeared in not the 2018 game, but in this one. I think it's really cool how you also fight a Persian general and gain a really unique fire-themed magic ability from him. Sure, this fight is just as basic as the Basilisk one right after it, but it's conceptually a lot cooler in my view, mainly just because it's something radically new and different. Unfortunately, there are no other Persian enemies in the entire rest of the game, so it feels kind of like a waste. Then yet another awesome idea is wasted as we explore the cliffs of Marathon and have to solve puzzles to dispel of Morpheus's dark clouds. Now I know what we're all thinking. Why is Morbius in a God of War game? Well, Jared Leto is actually a cult leader, meaning that to some people out there, he actually is a god. So I guess it does make sense. These clouds look awesome, but after this chapter, they're barely used ever again. Then we spend a lot of time in the Temple of Helios, which is fine enough. They're decent enemies, we unlock a new projectile magic ability, and the puzzle at the end, though nowhere near as good as most of the ones from the last two games, is one of the best in this game. We also get the Sun Shield, which is by far the best thing in the whole game. It allows for parrying that is sometimes even better than the parrying offered by the Golden Fleece in God of War 2, and it makes combat super fun and flowing. The combat isn't as good as God of War 2 because the magic spells are clunkier and it just overall isn't as smooth, but I'd argue that it's better than the combat in the first game, and that's really impressive. Then we go to Hades, which looks incredible and is a nice change of pace from the stone temple aesthetic of the majority of the game, but then we are quickly sent back down to the depths of Tartarus, which are nowhere near as interesting. Here we do unlock a second weapon, the Gauntlet of Zeus, which is very weighty and satisfying to use, but otherwise it's not that great. But the puzzles in this game are really what hurt it in my view, as well as the exploration. The combat is very fun and feels great for a sort of God of War 1.5, but the exploration is super basic, with 90% of chests holding valuables out in the wide open, and puzzles being extremely basic and easy. We don't get anything like the amazing Phoenix puzzle from God of War 2, although to be fair, we also get nothing as bad as the spiked block puzzle from the first game. I can understand limiting exploration due to technical limitations, especially because the game looks, sounds, controls, and feels fantastic in nearly every way for a 2008 PSP game, but puzzles are where I draw the line. Hell, there are Zelda games on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color that have incredible puzzles, so for this game to really only excel at visuals and combat, it ends up getting repetitive. At the very least, the game only took me the length of Oppenheimer to beat while also collecting every collectible, upgrading everything to the fullest, and even having 70,000 red orbs to spare by the time I was done, so it's not that bad, but I think more variety and enjoyability is necessary regardless. There's an actually pretty cool sequence where we find the Titan Atlas and then go back up to Hades to fight this creepy, shriveling monster with an awesome design. And his boss fight is by far the best one in the game, mainly due to how unsettling he is and how great the setting of a boat atop a river of blood works for this part. We gain one more magic ability that's kinda useless this far into the game, fight through way too many enemies, and then are faced with a finale where Kratos is forced to abandon his daughter in order to save the world. It's the only truly compelling part of the story, and while it is good, don't get me wrong, it's kinda just a retread of the guilt he felt throughout the first game. I know I might sound cruel, because I'm basically saying, oh yeah, you killed your wife and daughter, just get over it, dude, but I'm kind of talking about how it feels in the context of the story. And this isn't helped by the final boss, Persephone, who is quite lame, even compared just to the previous fight, but at least it's a decent enough ending to a decent enough game. I didn't really feel anything more than a slight nod and a relaxed thumbs up toward this game by the time it was finished, though. It's got impressive visuals and fun combat and doesn't ever get that boring or frustrating, but it's really not that great by any means. The story is forgettable as hell, every aspect of gameplay other than combat is basic and uninspired, and you could honestly skip over this one entirely and not miss out on much whatsoever. Do I recommend it? Not really, but I don't not recommend it. If you want to play it, go ahead. I'm sure you'll find it to be fine enough, just as I did. But even though there's nothing offensively wrong with it, there's not much at all that it truly gets right either. It's decent. It's okay. It's fine. It's the definition of a 3 out of 5. The third and final game in the mainline God of War trilogy, this was one that I was truly hyped to play. That ending from the already amazing God of War 2 set this up to be a straight-up marathon of fighting gods and taking on Olympus, which I just couldn't wait for. But did it live up to my enormous expectations? Well... yeah, I'd say that it did. Let's begin by talking about the visuals. This game looks nothing short of incredible. Of course, it's on the PS3, so it's going to look better than the previous ones, but even compared to other games on the same system, this one is a true visual marvel with breathtaking set pieces. We return to Hades, which looks pretty awesome, though not as stylistically unique as the version from the first game, go through Daedalus's mind-bending labyrinth, and even go on top of a Titan. This game doesn't hold back visually, that's for sure, and outside of a strange glitch near the end of the game where music was bugging out, I never experienced any technical issues, which is impressive for sure. And no, I didn't play the remastered version on PS4, I played the original PS3 one. It sure is crazy how much effort they put into the designs of the characters and enemies too. Each god looks very distinct and cool, especially Hades, like oh my god, his design is incredible, and mini-bosses like the Chimera, unfortunately not the same as the ones from the Resistance games, have an awesome look to them. It's a snake on top of a weird lion creature with 2 heads. How is that not amazing? A lot of other enemies are recycled, which is a bit disappointing, but it's what they've done to tweak how you interact with them in combat that matters, and that really makes the reused designs seem unimportant. Parrying, dodging, blocking, all of it feels much smoother than ever before and works flawlessly with such flowing movement to everything. You can now grab enemies and use them as battering rams, grab certain annoying enemies out of the ground, which makes them a whole lot less annoying than in previous titles, and use a wide variety of weapons in beautiful fashion. You now have a whopping 4 weapons. Sure, 3 of them are somewhat similar, but they're all incredible and fun to use. We of course have the Blades of Chaos, but we also get the Claws of Hades, which are purple claws used to rip souls out of people. I don't think I've ever uttered a more awesome sentence in my entire life than what I just said. There are also these gauntlets that work great for heavy, satisfying attacks against bigger foes, and this whip with the power to summon lightning. You can switch between all of these very fluidly, and it makes for some truly incredible combat that I found to be an absolute blast throughout the whole game. This game feels a lot longer than the other ones, even though it took me just as long as God of War 2 did, but that's because it's so much more complete and filled with stuff to do rather than because it gets stale and overstays its welcome like the first game. In fact, I was left just wanting more by the time I finished the game, but was still satisfied with what I had been given. That's the sign of an incredibly well-paced game. The combat is easily the best in the entire franchise outside of Ragnarok, bar none. Yes, better than God of War 2, better than God of War 2018. This is unbelievably addicting, satisfying, and constantly put a smile on my face with the crazy stunts and combos I pulled off, especially near the end of the game. This game also has the best difficulty of the older God of War games in my opinion, as there are multiple moments that are pretty damn tough, like really hard, but if you reach deep, you'll find the ability to do it. One of the coolest moments I've had in any video game in a while was seeing that message, "Do you want to switch to an easier difficulty?" Which I looked at for a few moments, thinking about it. This part was so brutal. Same with the final phase of the final boss fight. They were just so tough. But, put on some tunes, click that no button, and got to work. This game knows how to make you feel amazing and gives you the sense of empowerment that Kratos gets, as well as slaying the gods so consistently and brutally just feels right, even if it is pretty gross at points. Two other things have been changed majorly about the combat, namely the addition of a recharging item meter that allows you to use Helios' head to light up dark areas, stun enemies, and find hidden objects, Hermes' boots to run quickly, dash up and across some surfaces, and dodge in midair, and this fiery bow that is pretty helpful for some puzzles and fights. These all have multiple creative uses both for puzzles and combat, and are also just awesome items in general. I mean, it's literally the head of a god that you basically use as your own personal lantern. That's incredible. We also have a total overhaul of the magic system. Now we have one magic ability assigned to each weapon, which may have been controversial when the game came out, but I am a big fan of this change. It's a lot less overwhelming and allows the spells to influence your choice of weapon more deeply. I love it. These are the ability to summon souls for the Claws of Hades, a powerful stomp into the earth for the gauntlets, the ability to rain down a phalanx of Spartans for the Blades of Chaos, and the ability to shock enemies with the Nemesis Whip. These all work pretty great in combat and, as I said, make the player think strategically about what weapon to use in what scenario, and swapping between them frantically in the middle of a fight adds so much to the experience. Some other more minor things have been tweaked too in order to make them more convenient. Pushing blocks is now much quicker, and QTEs are now assigned to the sides of the screen that correspond with where the buttons are on the controller. But what exactly do you do in God of War 3? Well, other than fighting normal enemies, you kill a lot of gods. I mean a lot, like more than ever before. In the first 2 games, you killed 1 god each, pretty much, excluding the Sisters of Fate, and the same for Chains of Olympus. In this one, though, oh man. First, we have a pretty incredible opening with a fight against Poseidon atop the Titan Gaia, which is just an amazing set piece in and of itself, not to mention a really good fight. Then we're sent down to the underworld and fight Hades in one of the coolest fights ever. His attacks are ferocious and creative, but in the end, Kratos gets the upper hand and kills him in a brutal, though kind of hilarious way. After this, we go on to kill Helios, which isn't much of a fight, but it's a very memorable and gory death scene for him. And the next boss is also not much of a fight, as it mainly consists of chasing Hermes in a very creative and fun platforming segment, which allows you to use the returning grapple ability in Icarus Wings, then fighting him briefly and killing him. Not the best boss fight or anything, but the lead up is pretty damn fun. We also fight Hercules, which is definitely a bombastic fight, that's for sure. It's pretty fun with you having to avoid getting knocked into these spikes on the side of the arena, and then when he's vulnerable, throwing him into them. Plus, his death might be the most brutal one of them all, but I didn't really mind because the character is a true a-hole, and his voice actor is arguably just as annoying in real life, so it wasn't so sad to see Hercules go. But then we have one of the greatest things I've ever experienced in any video game. The Kronos boss fight. This is more than a boss fight. It's a whole level. A triumphant, astounding sight for the ages, an unbelievable, mind-blowing spectacle that all must experience. It's the Oppenheimer bomb explosion of video games. You just need to experience it for yourself to believe how good it is. It's got some very creative and kind of gross moments, such as a giant monster coming out of a wound in the Titan's shoulder, or you attacking his fingernail because it's the only thing you can actually make a dent in. The spectacle of this fight alone makes it worth it, but the way it goes through so many creative fights, platforming segments, solid chase scenes all across Kronos' body, and even inside his stomach, solidifies it as one of the all-time best levels and or bosses in video game history. Then there's the extremely unique Garden of Hera segment, which feels like living inside of an M.C. Escher painting, and the gauntlet that is Daedalus' Labyrinth, which climaxes with an awesome battle against a giant scorpion. Sure, it's maybe not the most centered around Greek mythology, but it's an awesome fight on its own. And finally, we go head-to-head with Zeus once again. The story essentially follows Kratos' quest for vengeance and how Pandora, someone he meets who reminds him of his daughter, breaks through his tough exterior to expose the broken inner psyche. The fight with Zeus does a great job of displaying all of this too. I'd say it's the most interesting and complex of the stories so far, even if most of the best stuff is concentrated at the end. I think that's kind of the point though. Kratos' quest for revenge only shows its truly ugly side to him near the end, as he starts to feel that there may be something important outside of mere revenge on Zeus. The phases of the Zeus boss fight are very brutal, very creative, and super hard, like geez. This is easily the hardest boss fight in the series outside of optional ones like the Valkyrie Queen or Berserker King, but that makes sense. It's Zeus. He's supposed to be hard to kill. This fight really does feel like you're going up against an unbeatable force, starting out with a very tense, almost 2D fighting game style phase. This then moves into the second part inside of the heart of Gaia, which you need to hit in order to gain health and stay alive, especially because Zeus and his clones will tear you to shreds in this part. Like seriously, it feels almost impossible to beat. But when I finally did beat it, it was an amazing feeling of accomplishment. I had grown to hate Zeus just as much as Kratos did through that whole boss fight, and so it made his death feel so rewarding. The story climaxes here too, with Kratos being attacked by Zeus' spirit and having to reach deep into his mind, forgive himself for his past sins, and fight with the idea of hope, which he had previously dismissed as being for the weak, in order to stay alive. It's a really great way to bring everything from the whole trilogy around at once, showing a slight bit of redemption for the monster he has gradually become. He forgives himself for the killing of his family, killing Athena, and uses the hope that he can become better to defeat Zeus, who has been consumed purely by fear and paranoia. And in the end, hope defeats that fear. It's surprisingly profound for a game where you spend most of your time ripping monsters limb from limb. However, the ending does leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. I love the visuals, music, characters, acting, story, especially combat, pacing, puzzles, and bosses of this game. I love nearly everything about this game, but the way they ended it, I don't know, man. It feels like they didn't really know entirely what they were doing. Athena wishes to take the power that Kratos found in Pandora's box and rebuild Olympus with it, but in a confusing ending that I don't really know how to make sense of, Kratos kills himself and says his vengeance is complete. Wasn't the whole point of the story that he wishes to redeem himself and be filled with hope? This just kind of throws that away, and I didn't understand why they wrote it like this. This is until I saw the post-credits scene where they reveal that he actually did live, and now I think I might get it. At first I was like, why the hell did they pull the stupid fake-out death cliche on us? I hate that. But now I believe it's actually there to show how he deceives Athena. He tricks her into thinking Pandora's box was empty and that he has no hope by ending his life, but he actually survives and leaves her without knowing. So maybe it was all a giant ploy to stop her from knowing what was really in the box and allow him to carry its power with him into the next phase of his life. It's still confusing and should have been done more clearly and orderly, but if you think about it like that, it makes sense to a certain extent, I suppose. But in the end, I can't really say that hurts the game for me that much. As I said, it does nearly everything right and is the most fun, replayable, and addicting title in the classic era of this franchise. Not to mention a damn great ending to an iconic trilogy. Maybe part 3 isn't always bad after all. 5 out of 5. The second and final portable entry in the series is a very clear evolution of the foundation that Ready at Dawn laid 2 years before, with heavy influences from the mechanical shifts made by God of War 3 and a lot of truly great moments. The last portable game kind of just coasted by on its impressive visuals and inoffensive gameplay, but was too scared to really do anything unique or truly compelling. But this game is clearly more confident with how it introduces quite a lot of original ideas and a far more ambitious story. For starters, the visuals are even better than the last game, and many of the set pieces are incredibly imaginative. And I'm not talking about ones like Hades or Morpheus's mist from Chains of Olympus that show up for just a little bit. I mean main major locales. The story is also absolutely awesome, like way better than it has any right to be. It's the perfect side story in my view, exploring deep into Kratos' past and family history in an encapsulating way without demystifying him to the point that it becomes an assassination of his character. Instead, it's an addition. In addition to this, the main villain of the game is far better, like infinitely better than Persephone in Chains of Olympus. It's not even comparable. In that game, I was honestly shocked that Morpheus, the character who they actually built up as a significant threat, wasn't the final boss, nor was he even a character you fought or met whatsoever. But here, the god of death Thanatos is mentioned throughout and given an absolutely jaw-dropping design to make him one of the best villains in the series up to this point. Honestly, in 3rd or 4th place, in my opinion. Kratos' brother Deimos may only show up for a little bit at the end, and his mother also only makes a short appearance, but they use Kratos' past guilt throughout the game to build up to the ending very well, so that when you actually do meet Deimos, it's still comparably impactful to if he had been a leading character throughout instead of a flashback. Though it uses Kratos' memories of a bygone era very effectively for its story, Ghost of Sparta is anything but stuck in the past. They've made many great changes here to follow suit with God of War 3, such as the improved QTEs, parrying system, special diving attacks, and block pushing. Additionally, they've taken new steps to introduce some very exciting new mechanics such as Hera's Bane, which powers up your Blades of Chaos temporarily and is also used for specific types of enemies who can't otherwise be damaged. At the start I found it frustrating, but by the end they figure out how to work it into combat well enough so that you don't feel like you're just waiting around for the meter to recharge, but still need to conserve it strategically. Combat is pretty great, even if some enemies really got on my nerves, especially these wraiths. They don't make too many appearances though. The different parts of the game also offer a lot of great variety, with it essentially being bookended by visits to the pretty awesome and epic set piece of Atlantis, having really memorable fire and ice themed segments in the middle, and also including 2 truly stunning levels that really impressed me. First was Kratos' home of Sparta, which was honestly really cool to see and visually gorgeous for a PSP game. I wish it was a little more extensive because it goes by far too quickly, but it's still a cool set piece. And then we have the Domain of Death at the end, which may have one of the coolest names ever, but the actual atmosphere and design of the level as a gauntlet of tough enemies leading up to the final boss is even cooler. And finally, I want to talk about the game's bosses. We begin with Scylla, which is a pretty cool fight, mainly due to the atmospheric location of a stormy seaside, but the actual design of the boss fight rings a bell, strangely enough.
Oh, I see how they did that. Self-plagiarism.
But yeah, it's a fine enough start to the whole ordeal, followed up by another alright fight against Callisto, which is not that impressive in terms of gameplay, just like Scylla, but the concept is, as the kids say these days, metal as fuck. A giant monster claws its way out of the corpse of Kratos' mom. It's absolutely bizarre, but I'm 100% here for it, just as I am here for the pretty incredible, epic, and impressive fight against Thanatos' daughter, Erinys. It starts out as a pretty normal, but much more intense and interesting fight than usual, then evolving into something truly incredible when she turns into a giant falcon, and you have to fight her in more inventive ways, especially as you fly through the sky and gradually break her armor with Hera's Bane. It's frustrating that they don't exactly tell you what parts you're actually controlling and what's a cutscene, just like this part right here where I spent literally 5 minutes repeating the same QTE because I didn't know you were meant to aim the child Kratos towards different parts of the mirror until I messed around with the controls.
And that's really weird, because usually I'm the guy, I'm the expert you go to for the exact right place to throw a small child.
But other than that, Erinys is an incredible fight, especially for a portable game, and her dad Thanatos is the final boss, and, well, let's just say, the poison apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The Thanatos fight brings Deimos and Kratos together in an epic finale, with Kratos giving him the pretty awesome second weapon of the game, a shield and spear that you can also use as a projectile, and then taking on the God of Death in a truly amazing way. This fight is legitimate perfection. It's got the feeling of scale as Thanatos transforms into a giant monster just like his daughter, and you'll have to combine every mechanic from throughout the game, from the many magic spells which, though quite forgettable and not as satisfying as most of the other games, are very helpful toward the end, to Hera's Bane and the help offered by her brother. Especially during these cinematic moments where the two attack him in incredible synchrony, it's just on a whole other level that blows my mind, considering this is a PSP game. And the ending? Well, I don't feel the need to tell you exactly what happens, but I do want you to just watch this clip.
By the gods, what have I become?
Death, the destroyer of worlds.
Yeah, they referenced Oppenheimer. What was it I said about the first game's themes of greed influencing conquest and war? Yeah, this is the best example of that theme being referenced in a later entry in the entirety of this classic series so far. It's awesome, it put a huge smile across my face, and I love it for that. So yeah, while it may have some segments that feel like they could have been longer, some weird glitches, some mechanics that feel frustrating at first, some of the lamest magic spells in the series, and doesn't remedy the lack of great puzzles and exploration that plague Chains of Olympus, it's got some absolutely incredible visuals, combat, boss fights, and story beats that make it a great experience throughout. And with the far more creative set pieces as well, this is just a flat out great game. This is a game that, if remade today, I'd gladly replay and could easily be made into a game close to God of War 2 and 3 in terms of quality, whereas the previous portable title would probably still be kinda lame unless it was completely rebuilt. Thus, I will give this game a very strong 4 out of 5. Even though it's been 5 games already, this game left me feeling satisfied with the franchise and not bored of it by the end. And now, as the trophy you get at the end of this game states, only one remains. The final game in the original series of God of War games taking place within Greek mythology is quite the interesting black sheep of the franchise. Sure, the weirdest and most obscure entry is most likely the mobile game God of War Betrayal, or the Facebook Messenger visual novel, what the hell? However, in terms of mainline, serious entries, Ascension is the most bizarre one, mainly because of the fact that nobody really understands why it even exists in the first place. Ascension is yet another goddamn prequel. Yeah, this takes place before all of the other games and is meant to be honest, I have no idea what the purpose of telling this story is or could even be interpreted as. It's truly that unnecessary. It's not like we get to spend time with Kratos' family and feel the sadness he does in the most potent way ever before when they die. It's not like we get to explore some interesting part of his past like in Ghost of Sparta. This game's story is just completely useless. Even Chains of Olympus, as inconsequential as most of it was, at the very least provided some context for Kratos' anger against the gods, had a decent scene with Kratos having to leave his daughter behind, and the death of Persephone was referenced by Hades in God of War 3. But this game, there's nothing about it that matters. It follows Kratos' fight against the Furies, 3 sisters whose job it is to keep the oaths sworn by mortals to gods. Considering Kratos killed off most of the Greek pantheon, it makes sense that there's not going to be some absolutely fantastic new villain, but really? I mean, there were still some notable gods left that weren't killed, such as Demeter, Apollo, and Hestia. They could have done better than these 3 nobodies, I'm just saying. I wish I had a lot to say, but truthfully, there weren't many story moments in the game at all. Essentially, it's just Kratos trying to fight back when they come after him, and he disobeys his oath to Ares. Then they imprison him, then he breaks out and stops them. There's also Orcos, the son of the Furies, who helps out Kratos in a fight against his mothers. It's interesting how he's one of the only characters in the Greek saga who always helps and never betrays or harms Kratos, but he's really not that interesting of a character. He's not bad or anything, but when he only shows up like 4 times in a game that's already pretty light on story or cutscenes, it's hard for me to truly care about an ending where Kratos has to kill him for some strange contrived reason. Your mother's made you the Oath Keeper and you can't do anything about it? Yeah, right, the writers just needed a reason to get rid of you because you never appear again in the other games. This is yet another reason why making a prequel in this period makes 0 sense. The one moment of the whole story that I liked was when Kratos Spartan kicks a Fury pretending to be a general in what feels like a reference to 300. Now, I haven't seen that movie, but I know of that famous scene, and it made me chuckle a bit to see it replicated here. So with a boring and forgettable story that has no reason to exist, we should at least hope for the gameplay and presentation to be top-notch. Right? Well, before you go into the comments section and talk about how what I'm about to say is too mean and harsh, keep in mind that this game came out 3 years after God of War 3. This was no spin-off. This was the next full entry in the franchise, pretty much God of War 4. 3 years is the same gap between God of War 2 and 3, where they also had to account for developing for a brand new console in HD for the first time. So I think it's fair to expect some greatness from Ascension. First off, the graphics really aren't that great in my opinion. Now, it does look fine in general for a PS3 game, but I'd argue at many moments it either looks the same or worse than God of War 3, which again came out multiple years before, and the set piece variety is really what hurts it. It's embarrassing. Not only does the game's frame rate get weird whenever you use a special attack, but the game doesn't make up for its unimpressive technical side with its creative side. The game essentially consists of 3 major areas that you spend tons of time in, and that's it. You spend the entire opening, the midway boss fight, and the ending in the prison created by the Furies, which is a cool idea for a set piece in general. It's a giant 8-armed man turned into a jail for people who disobey the gods. How the hell do you screw that up?
Oh, sorry everyone. I'm just trying to get a really good and up-close and detailed view of what's on that TV.
Yeah, the damn camera is awful. The entire first boss fight is lame as hell and one of the worst in the series. There are some frustratingly hard ones, there are some forgettable basic ones, but this one is both. This is not an exciting or interesting fight. Hell, I don't even know what the hell it is I'm fighting, nor is it fair or fun. It's extremely difficult in my opinion due to the camera zooming so far out that I can't even see where Kratos is or tell him apart from the little minions. That's quite a problem. The middle boss fight is alright and a lot better even if it's not that interesting, and the final boss is pretty cool in all honesty, but it simply doesn't cut it in my opinion. The final boss is very cool in terms of the stuff Kratos does during it, but most of it is just QTEs, so it doesn't feel like I'm actually fighting anything. The fully interactive parts of the fight are extremely uninteresting, so this feels like a glorified cutscene. Plus, the low stakes induced by the uninteresting villains really don't help it. The only other boss is against some old dude with a little shriveled tumor on his side within the Temple of Delphi, which is probably the most in-depth in terms of the combat, but it's incredibly frustrating due to the sheer lack of clarity in terms of what exactly you're supposed to do to avoid his attacks, and then for the more cinematic sliding moments afterwards, which feeds into a major problem that we'll get into shortly. The Temple of Delphi is one of the other major areas in the game, and it's full of these lame quote-unquote puzzles where you need to sniff some Joker gas in order to find the path forward. It's a little cool the first time, similar to the Amulet of Ouroboros later on that can heal and decay the status of an object, but neither of these are used in any creative ways for most of the game. It mainly boils down to walking up to the right thing and waiting for an animation to finish. No joke. And finally, we have the Statue of Apollo, where you literally spend half of the game. Did they learn nothing from the first game? In fact, that's not actually a fair comparison. This is way worse because there are no interesting shifts in the theming of different segments. It's just one long slog. I kind of like some of the puzzles in it and how they use the cool mechanic of creating a copy of Kratos to hold down a switch or chain or things like that, and certain ones surprised me with how I had to solve them, but otherwise, this statue is absolute garbage. By the end, I was dreading every single room because I knew I'd have to fight another army of annoying enemies, and that's really what I want to talk about with regard to this game. The game has no reason to exist, it has the worst story in the franchise, it has disappointing graphics, forgettable music, and practically no variety in terms of locations, but it could still be saved by the combat, right? Well, I'm sorry to say, but this is the worst combat in the series. But why? Well, it really comes down to 3 major things. Number 1, the parry system has been given the Taco Bell bathroom treatment and has been completely obliterated. For some reason, the geniuses behind this masterpiece decided it would be a good idea to strip down the parry system and make it a lot more difficult. Now, instead of automatically getting a parry when you block at the perfect moment, you have to hold down the block button and press a button at the right moment. Oh, and it doesn't even work 99% of the time. I was able to get maybe like 5 parries in the whole game, whereas I was usually able to get more than 5 per fight in the other games. That's embarrassing. It totally ruins the flow of combat and leads to the feeling of just holding L1 the entire fight being the safest option, which sucks. This is even worse than the first game, where you could at the very least knock an enemy back sometimes for blocking properly. Number 2. The dodging feels like you're on methamphetamine. Not only does it suck to block, but you can no longer rely as much on the dodge either. Dodging is an integral part of the combat of these games, but here it feels a lot floatier and less precise. Not to mention you can no longer dodge out of a crowd of enemies or the Medusa's gaze as easily. Maybe they thought it would make the game more challenging, but these things were always meant to be overly tough challenges that you'd be able to stop by becoming more defensive. It forced you to switch up your strategy in a clever way, but here it feels like you're just getting piled on the entire time, and it's insanely annoying. Number 3. Kratos sucks in this game. And no, I don't mean he's returning the favor to the architect from the first game. I mean his weapon and abilities are pathetic here. Yeah, that's right, I said weapon, not weapons, because for some fucking reason, instead of having multiple cool weapons like in every single other game in the entire series, Kratos gets 4 elements for his Blades of Chaos, which is a dumb idea in the first place, but the fact that they all feel kind of the exact same, and you have to upgrade them to unlock their magic abilities makes it even worse. This means that as you unlock elements, they aren't on an even playing field with the first one you unlocked, so you're probably just going to stick with that one, especially since they all feel the exact same anyways. Plus, you're a lot more limited in how much magic you can use, the items you unlock have extremely lame uses in combat that are total afterthoughts, and... the rage meter. The rage meter in this game makes me rage more than anything. It builds up the more you attack enemies without getting hit. This is an alright and interesting idea, I suppose, but it really doesn't work in this game due to how consistently you'll get hit and how weak most of the rage attacks end up being. It seriously made me audibly say, wow, I really hit all of those enemies perfectly just for that? In conclusion, God of War Ascension should be called God of War Ascension. This game is legitimately bad, not mediocre, not alright, but forgettable, and certainly not good. This game has annoying combat that's worse than even the original game from 8 years before, no truly great locations, a camera that should be tried for war crimes, and a laughably lame story. There's very little I can praise beyond the typical God of War staples such as cool moments and good voice acting, but even Troy Baker can't save this game from a 2 out of 5.
Apparently there was also a multiplayer mode, but that's since been taken down, so I can't really comment on it. It might be an explanation for the weird mechanical changes and lack of depth within the single-player mode, but it does not excuse them.
There's also an included demo for The Last of Us. Let's try it out. Maybe it'll help me wash the bad taste out of my mouth from this bucket of crap.
Alright, so that's a disaster, but let's see what else we can find in this box. Holy Mother of God. Wow, okay. This is like finding a diamond buried in a turd.
Sons? Sons killing your mothers? Your fathers?
No. We will be the gods we choose to be.
God of War is one of the most important, monumental franchises in all of gaming history, especially for M-rated games, and a clear indication of this is that it's only one of 2 major PlayStation franchises to have survived more than 1 or 2 generations. Most PlayStation studios will work on a series for 1 generation, maybe make a sequel on the next, and then stop and move on. Examples of this are Resistance, Infamous, Uncharted, Jak, and Sly Cooper, but God of War and Ratchet & Clank have managed to go strong from the PS2 all the way to the present day, with both series being alive and well. But this didn't happen without a few changes. For example, Ratchet & Clank got a soft reboot on the PS3 with a future series, followed by yet another reboot in 2016, and God of War got the same treatment just 2 years later. The series was very beloved on the PS2, PS3, heck, even on the PSP, with practically every entry being kept in high regard, and the series being one of the most consistently impressive from both a technical standpoint as well as in terms of quality. After God of War Ascension in 2013, it seemed that, though the series was very good and many were still enjoying it, it had gotten less astonishing after 6 whole entries all had the same gameplay style and similar mythological elements. But only 5 years later, a full-on reboot of the series was released, moving the franchise into Norse mythology rather than Greek, with Kratos being redesigned and given a son. As is the case with practically every reboot, I'm sure this originally turned some heads and ruffled a few feathers, but once the game came out, it became an instant classic and was regarded as one of the best titles of the generation and decade. I've heard a lot of people say that God of War is like the PS4's equivalent to The Last of Us, which is quite understandable. Even though it didn't release at the tail end of the console's life like that game, which is a title that can instead be awarded to its sequel and Ghost of Tsushima, it did amass over 20 million sales as of 2022, was possibly the biggest critical darling of the year, and even won Game of the Year at the Game Awards, which is actually credible because that was before the TGBs existed. Considering how much I love The Last of Us, it would be criminal for me not to give this game a chance. So even though I originally gave up on this game a few hours in and opted to play through Horizon Zero Dawn instead back in 2019, I finally dedicated myself to beating this game and taking a deep look at it. There is, however, one aspect I didn't have to look into very deeply in order to understand its quality, that being the visuals and presentation. God of War is one of the best looking games of all time, and I don't know if anyone can really disagree with that. Previous entries in the franchise always looked quite good, but with the new cinematic perspective, not only during cutscenes but during gameplay as well, it really shines here more than ever before. The game is very realistic with its art style, but just like most PlayStation exclusive, it fills its world with awesome and unique enemies that have creative designs. The Last of Us has the Cordyceps infected, Horizon has the jaw-dropping machines, and this game has... I don't know how to even describe these things. From the undead tree things with poison bubbling inside their bodies, to giant dragons, knights with the most inconveniently long swords in existence, and absolutely awesome dark elves, every single enemy type and character in this game is unique. There literally isn't a single character here that looks similar or acts similar to another. Even the two brothers, Brock and Sindri, look nothing alike, which is pretty hilarious, but also highlights the incredible level of creativity within this game and its visuals. Without even getting into the worlds and realms, the enemies you face in this game are memorable in their own right. Giant werewolf-like enemies with Wolverine claws, creepy and mysterious revenants covered in dirty rags, weird slug-like enemies that burrow underground, and even enemies with weaponry and shields made out of ice.
Ice is nice.
I can remember all of these very easily, and the way you fight them has a clever link to their design.
helping you keep track of specific weaknesses for each of them. Does this enemy move too fast for you to use melee attacks? Use some range moves. Does this one like to hide in the dark? Use some light arrows. Does this one use ice attacks? Use a weapon that burns. Every single one of them is incredibly unique, and even though I'm not big into mythology like many people, this game really infatuated me with all of its creatures, not only because of how well they've been brought to life with their hauntingly beautiful designs, but also because of how memorable the ways you fight them are. God of War's phenomenal characters and worlds bring the realistic visuals to new heights, making it feel very different from other games. It's clear that they put tons of effort into the art design for this game, because even though it looks like real life, it brings you to so many fantastical locales that it truly transports you to another world. On top of this, the game is entirely done with one camera angle. It's all a continuous one take through gameplay and cutscenes, of course considering the free control you have of it while playing. This is probably the biggest thing setting the game's presentation apart, and I love it. It allows for so many seamless transitions that don't need to cut away from the gameplay, but rather seamlessly weave through it to keep the flow constant. Of course, this isn't nearly as hard to do in a game as in a movie, but bravo in every considerable way to whoever had this idea, because it allows for some of the smoothest movement from gameplay to QTE, gameplay to cutscene, or cutscene to gameplay. There's so much beautiful variety in every realm you go to, with every enemy you encounter, with every boss you fight, and with every character you speak to. It's an absolute technical marvel. Not to mention the incredible music, which is uplifting, powerful, and memorable in every sense of the word, combining every aspect of the culture it's representing to create very fitting music that works with the game perfectly, but also stands on its own as absolutely exceptional. But if any of you have ever heard of a game called The Order 1886, then you should know that good presentation doesn't automatically get a game off the hook if it's not good to play, and God of War 2018 has quite the monumental shift from its series roots. While the originals were really fun beat-em-up style games, the reboot goes for a far more intense, yet far more free experience with more ways to screw up, but more ways for you to outsmart your enemy. It's the living and breathing definition of weighty, satisfying, and impactful. You may get repeatedly beat down, but it still gives you a feeling of power over your enemies with the incredible weight of every single one of your attacks. Even though you can easily get combos going like the old games, that's not the goal here. Rather, it's about evading and striking very strategically and landing the right moves on the right enemies at the perfect time. An easy enemy is not too awful hard to take down, as pretty much any move will work on them. But as elemental enemies, enemies with strange techniques, and enemies that enter specific attack patterns are introduced, you will constantly be switching around your arsenal of possible moves to get the upper hand. Some enemies can only be killed with some weapons, some need to be stunned before they can escape you, and some are just complete a-holes. But despite all the variety in the enemies, it never gets to be too much, because each of your weapons serves an express purpose and has important advantages that aren't too tough to keep track of. Even though it may be daunting at first, you'll quickly discover how to flow these different moves together seamlessly and what the appropriate tools for certain foes are. Not only does your axe have a light throw and a heavy throw, but you can also directly hit enemies lightly or heavily, and combining these four moves in different ways is where the fun really ramps up, and as you gain access to new skills, things just continue to get more interesting. You know, when I first played this game, I stopped after just a few hours because it started to get repetitive. But it took until now for me to realize that I was just playing the game wrong. In order to get the perfect experience from this game, the skill tree is an absolute must. If you don't get new skills, you will not only get your butt handed to you by enemies, but you'll also be reliant on the same moves. And even though that might sound like a complaint, it's actually one of my favorite unique aspects of the game now that I've beaten it. Most games have a skill tree that is cool and somewhat helpful, but you don't really get the feeling that its effects will have a massive impact on your experience. However, God of War allows you to access some of the best moves in the entire game through skills, and I honestly couldn't imagine my playthrough without these. They're so incredibly helpful to the flow and intensity of combat, and it adds to the true sense of progression within the game. Not only do the characters progress higher and higher through the 9 realms to get to the highest peak, but the player simultaneously gets more and more powerful through the entire journey, going from rags to riches and getting comfortable with every combo and technique. The incredible sense of progression that you'll get from this game plays a larger role in its worlds, story, and difficulty alike, but by itself boosts the combat to a legendary level. It may seem a bit slow at first, but it manages to catch up to the speed and mobility of the older games while amping up the intensity and impact that this new style brings. 2 special moves for Kratos, 3 weapon types, specials for Atreus, stat boosts that recharge over time, different types of arrows, and even different handles for your blades can make or break every encounter. The skill level of your foes may seem daunting at first, but over time you'll be given enough freedom to fight back and take them down. In general, the difficulty of this game is one of its biggest achievements, but also its largest flaw. I think the challenge offered during the main story and many Midgard side missions is perfect at giving the player a lot of satisfaction once they conquer their foes, as you'll really have to think through their attacks and weaknesses to get the upper hand. There aren't many battles whatsoever that you can just breeze through, and that's a testament to how strategic the combat is. But on the other hand, there are multiple parts of this game where the challenge spikes incredibly hard, leaving you with a lot of satisfaction once you beat it, but a lot of frustration that doesn't feel like it's happening as a result of your skill level, but because of problems with the balancing of the game. I love how this is one of the very few games I've played recently where it's almost always very tough, but very fair at the same time, giving the player enough options to overtake their foes, even in the toughest of situations. If you're losing, chances are there's a piece of the puzzle you're forgetting, and once you gracefully add it into your furious blaze of attacks, you'll rise to the top. But at the same time, there are some areas where this idea is completely abandoned. During the main story, there really aren't that many parts that have me dying constantly unless I was just being an idiot. I mean, sure, the fight in Tyr's temple against the 2 knights is very tough, but once I got down to the strategy of their attacks, I managed to dispatch them pretty quickly. There is, however, one part of the game that is complete and utter BS, and if you've played it, you probably know what I'm talking about. The Gauntlet Between the Realms. This is like a lot of the game. Challenging, but doable, except for the Alfheim battle against the 2 Dark Elves. The problem with this fight is that these little pea-brains love to fly up in the air and cloud your vision so you can't even see, meaning you can't very often get attacks in on them, especially if they're both alive at once. I died again and again and again to them. I even threw in the towel and waited until the next day to try again, but eventually, I did it on my first try using the Chaos Blades. I had been using the axe the whole time and failing over and over because all the walkthroughs said that the axe was the best weapon. So yeah, thanks a lot to them. But in all seriousness, this battle is extremely cheap and unfair, and I only beat it because I got so much practice. So if you're about to go up against this part, make sure you're prepared and make sure to use the weapon that best fits you. This fight, alongside many side missions like the Niflheim Mist and Muspelheim Trials, is indicative of the game's largest flaw: unbalanced difficulty. I'm not just saying that it's a problem because I don't want the game to be hard. In fact, I do. It is hard and I love a lot of it regardless, but these parts take it way too far and don't give the player a challenge that feels deliberate, but rather one that feels like a result of someone having a cool idea for a fight, putting it into the game quickly, and forgetting to check if it was totally fair or balanced. And in general, there are some enemies with attacks that feel ridiculously out of place and unfair. I already talked about the Dark Elves, but the Hellwalkers also have an attack where they can freeze you and immediately get an insane number of hits in, which not only happens way too quickly and efficiently, It's in general just the most infuriating type of thing for a game to do. Whenever an enemy grabs onto me and just wails on me non-stop, there's nothing quite like it to make me want to scream. Looking at you, Balls 3D. Outside of that, though, the gameplay in general is phenomenal, allowing you access to multiple creative realms, some of which are reserved entirely for the post-game, with each of them offering a very unique style and look that makes them feel alive. From the depressing, clouded Niflheim deprived of any life not yet corrupted by the Revenants, to the fiery hellscape of Muspelheim, which feels like a living indication of the doom that shall befall all other realms when Ragnarok comes, to the actual underworld, which is very different from other depictions of it, that is Helheim. These worlds aren't always shown to have inhabitants, but whether they are or aren't does nothing to hamper the incredibly distinct attributes each of them has that make them stick in my mind as some of the coolest fantasy worlds I've seen in a game. If you look through God of War's gameplay as a whole, it's incredibly fun and has a lot of great mechanics that flow together well. And even though the fast travel system is cumbersome and the difficulty is sometimes inconsistent, especially with the side missions, it's enjoyable to go through the combat and beat the crap out of your enemies, solve really intelligent but never cryptic puzzles, and discover the ins and outs of these incredible worlds nevertheless, creating a game that's much more than just nice to look at, but incredible to play. The final important thing to take a look at with this game is, of course, the story, which many have lauded as one of the best of the entire generation, and even one of the best of all time. It's clear that this is the main inspiration for the constant comparisons to The Last of Us, so let's see if it manages to compare. If you know me, you'll know that I adore the stories of both Last of Us games, and even though they take clear inspiration from other works, they stand on their own due to their incredible themes and believable characters who perfectly represent said themes. So I'll come right out and say that I take no issue with this game's heavy inspiration from the first Last of Us game. In fact, I commend it. That story is so incredible and well made that other games were inevitably going to be inspired by it, and I think that's great. The game follows Kratos, who has removed himself from his old life and run off to the north, then having a wife and son in the process. He has completely shed himself of the title of God in favor of being a husband and father, and has tried to deprive his son of any knowledge of his past in the hopes that he won't go down the same path. Eventually, though, the mother dies and they must bring her ashes to the highest peak in all of the realms to fulfill her final request. It's somewhat similar to the first Last of Us, but I believe the detail of Atreus being Kratos' biological son, rather than just a child he's entrusted to take care of, really does have a major impact on the story. Joel does hide his past, just like Kratos, but he's pretty open about the 25 years in which he was a brutal murderer and smuggler. He simply hides his daughter's death, whereas Kratos wants to avoid any mention of his previous evils. It's a detail that at first seems minute, but as the stories progress, it's very clear to see how different they are. The hereditary connection between Kratos and Atreus not only brings Atreus closer to his father than Ellie is to Joel, but also closer to repeating his mistakes. Of course, they both end up doing this, but Atreus is never without Kratos' guidance, and in the end it's a learning experience for both of them, rather than just for the younger one. Kratos and the player may not be totally connected, but if you've played through some of the older games, you'll also get the feeling of shame for what you did, and so the sympathy that the player has for Kratos is immediately understandable, and helps the story further explore the theme of family and learning, showing that both the child and the father in this plot need to grow and understand each other better. I'm not going to completely spoil it, but the villain also has a connection to this theme that is pulled off in a plot twist that feels incredibly natural and doesn't even try to be shocking with how it's presented, and yet it is. The direct lines we can draw between the hero and villain's different journeys with family, as well as the similarities between them, are one of the strongest, most unique aspects of the story that allow it to really resonate with many people who have made mistakes with family, misunderstood someone close to them, or not recognized the signs of manipulation. as the representation we see of manipulation and abuse in this game's story is incredibly realistic and well done. Whether you've lost family due to your own mistakes or due to something out of your control, this game tells a powerful tale of the effect that a bond with others can have on us, and how losing or gaining that bond can really shape who we are and become. It's one of the most graceful stories out there due to how fluidly it connects to gameplay, yet still feels more subdued than when it needs to be. The gameplay is very rarely slowed down, yet the story is and still manages to flow perfectly into everything else. The characters, the themes, and the dialogue are all sharpened to a T to deliver comedy, seriousness, drama, or tragedy whenever both necessary and natural. It goes to a lot of dark places, but never shows them off in a pretentious way or in a manner that feels like they're just trying to use these themes to be shocking, which is a very common problem with most stories. It's strictly focused on the journey, just like Kratos, and even though there are so many details to appreciate along the way, it's only once we get to our goal and complete the game that we can look back upon them, or review them, if you will, that we can truly recognize their quality and beauty. It's a magnificent story within an incredibly well-presented game that manages to feel just like a film, with all the incredible editing, music, camera work, visuals, characters, and emotional impact that you'd expect from one, but combined with the incredible mechanics, fun exploration, intense yet satisfying combat, and jaw-dropping worlds that you'd expect from a video game. It's not a masterpiece in my opinion, but neither was the first Last of Us, and in fact they both suffer from a similar issue. But the important thing is that both of these games have left a major impact on the games industry, with their artistic quality and passionate creativity shining through any flaws to make for an incredible, unforgettable, and generation-defining experience that I am proud to have gone through.
You will always be a monster.
I know. But I am your monster no longer.
God of War is clearly a staple in the video game industry, with massive critical and commercial success for nearly every game in the franchise. From the original release nearly 18 years ago to the 2018 reboot and even the portable spin-offs, it's a beloved series to so many and one of PlayStation's most reliable sources of legacy content. I played through the reboot earlier this year and reviewed it and evidently loved the game. I was let down a bit by the difficulty having some inconsistencies, the fast travel system being overly cumbersome, and the repetition of certain enemies which softened the impact of the truly fantastic combat, but I still thought it was great and especially enjoyed its unique world. I did want more of it though, since I didn't think they took enough advantage of the amazing 9 realms in the game. A few like Alfheim and Midgard were very fleshed out and well realized, but I thought it could have done more with its basis. And what would you know, they made a sequel. After I finally gave the last game a real chance and beat it, I was very excited for Ragnarok. And once one of the greatest trailers of all time at the September State of Play came around, I knew this may very well be a masterpiece. Is it though? Well, many people cite the last game as being a masterpiece, and I disagree, so we're gonna take a critical look at God of War Ragnarok and find out. Visually, this game knocks it out of the park. Obviously, I can't speak to how the PS4 version runs, but on PS5, this is one of the most technically solid experiences I've had. I literally had one noticeable glitch, and that was it. Incredibly impressive that it's so sound, but it's even more amazing to simply gaze upon how the game looks. Nearly every single realm in this game is beautiful in its own way. There isn't one area that looks bad, and there are so many incredible small details to notice. If you just stop and look around you, you'll notice that there are amazing living creatures surrounding you and blending into the background. Sony Santa Monica doesn't attempt to shove any of the technological prowess in your face here. In fact, they hide these small additions as best they can to make for a more organic experience, which just shows how much they care about fantastic world building over superficial spectacle. Vanaheim's mysterious, beautiful forests and amazing day-to-night transitions, Helheim's thick green tint that forces you to gaze within your own soul and the hopelessness of others' resting place, and Svartalfheim's rocky terrain slowly being overtaken by water. Every single area you visit has so much to offer. It's all memorable and creative with how these are presented, and with a continuation and even improvement of the character and enemy design variety, you simply cannot make any reasonable argument that Ragnarok isn't a graphical marvel. The music still goes so damn hard, with this booming set of voices speaking the tongue of the 9 realms, which, even though I can't understand a single lyric, the power exhibited by this music and its overall tone still shakes me to my core and eggs me on to continue through this amazing journey. And don't even get me started on the acting. Some of the single greatest performances in the gaming industry can be seen here once again, though this time around not just from Kratos and Freya. Every single character knocks it out of the park. Atreus, Brock, Sindri, Thor, Odin, and especially Freya sell the story better than I sell knives that definitely don't have hepatitis blood on them. This game really is an emotional roller coaster, which I'll dig into a bit more once I talk about the story, but what does truly help achieve that is how all of these actors play out their roles. Hell, even Mimir, the goddamn talking head, has an insanely emotional, touching moment near the end, and the actor perfectly pulls it off. In the 2018 game, these actors brought their unique characters to life and made this wild fantasy setting feel connected to a focused, grounded story that any person in the real world can relate to and get invested in. But this time around, they are great for building the world and for shaping some of the most impressive character arcs I've seen within a game. Christopher Judge as Kratos and Danielle Basutti as Freya specifically, wow, I have no words for these two other than amazing. Kratos already had gone through so much in the last game alone. I wondered if they could really make his story as impactful this time around, but due to the way his relationship with Atreus evolves, I think it may very well be better. And Freya? Jesus Christ. Her torment is not used as a device to remove any mental fortitude and turn her into an unreasonable character defined by one emotion, but rather she too goes through a complex journey that her actress perfectly displays. Many little conversations between her and the other characters build up and play a role in her eventual fluctuation in decision making. I'm not exactly the biggest fan of characters who just snap from one angle to another unless, I don't know, they're criminally insane and meant to act like that. But what I love about these actors is that no matter what insane stuff happens, they stick true to the root of their character and continue to keep the story in a level-headed direction, making the payoff of some bombastic occurrence feel much more earned and satisfying. This is reflected by the continuation of the one-take camera style, which truly works here to great effect. I think it makes a bit more sense for 2018's story of this long journey toward the peak of the Nine Realms and toward a confrontation of the true past, but this game also phenomenally executes the feeling of one solid adventure that never loses sight of you, and that you never lose sight of. But you want to talk about the gameplay, don't you? Well, that's definitely the most important part, I cannot deny. Is it good? You betcha. God of War Ragnarok's combat is best described as more insane than me when I'm doing my Joker laugh. It never ceases to amaze me how many awesome things you can pull off in this game, and if you thought that applies to 2018, just wait. I legitimately feel like I'll never be able to go back to 2018's combat after playing this one, because it's just a simple fact that every single thing has been made better, similar to Batman Arkham City to Asylum, Uncharted 2 to Uncharted 1, Horizon Forbidden West to Horizon Zero Dawn, and many more. There is not one downgrade in the combat system, but rather a whole lot of big upgrades. There is a much larger focus on mobility, which I love. The weight and heaviness of the last game's encounters is retained, and everything you do still feels impactful and gives you that sense of power that God of War games are so good at achieving. But you also have so many more options of how you can move around your foes. You can use the Blades of Chaos to grapple onto ledges and swing from one platform to another, which also allows you to slam down afterward with the momentum and... Come on, how can I not love the hell out of this move? It is so fun and satisfying to swing around like a madman and smash into an unwitting enemy on the ground that I find myself doing this a concerning number of times. You get so many opportunities to let your skill shine, and I really love how you can flow your moves together. Switching between weapons feels so instantaneous and much more necessary, keeping the movement the same but forcing your strategy to adapt as the threats around you change. And that bigger focus on momentum really makes it feel more exciting and fun throughout. I will be honest, there were points early in the last game where the combat got kind of repetitive, especially before you got your hands on the Blades of Chaos, but here I found both weapons to be equally useful and to have amazing moves. There's also a third weapon that you unlock, a very swift and slick spear that I always find a treat to use. I was always switching around based on what felt right, whereas in the last game I almost always preferred the more fluid motions of the Blades of Chaos. This ability Ragnarok has to give each of the three weapons a unique feel that works best in different situations truly does add tons of variety and enjoyment. Sony Santa Monica is quoted as having their game design philosophy be play with your food, and I think that's the best outlook to have, at least with this kind of game. When I think about the greatest combat systems I've experienced, I think of games where your ability to fight off enemies is dependent on how you wield the many mechanics and abilities are at your disposal. This game truly succeeds in such a regard since I always loved experimenting, especially during the tougher fights, and finding a way to fight off enemies in a fun, flashy, and most importantly, satisfying way that worked for me. It allows for so much variation in how each player plays through the game. Play with your food. Gotta love it. But what about the gameplay outside of the combat? Well, there's a lot of content to experience here, which I appreciate, and though it's not all perfect, many of the side missions and activities are legitimately worth sinking time into and very creative. I adore many of these shorter experiences, such as freeing a massive jellyfish creature from the desert of Alfheim. This is a very creative, fun mission that builds a legitimate connection between Kratos, the player, and the world. As you venture through all of these places at your own pace, you find so many amazing secrets that are sometimes just as astonishing as the major twists and turns of the main story. Specific activities are also fantastic, such as the Berserker Gravestones. These may very well be the greatest side bosses in video game history, as their difficulty balance is perfection. You're constantly motivated to keep going because everything is fair, and no matter how insurmountable the odds seem with some of these battles, you'll eventually feel a true sense of accomplishment after defeating each one. You can literally discover a massive abandoned city with 2 dragons to fight in it by searching around Vanaheim, and that alone provides so many amazing new experiences that I never would have seen if I hadn't ventured off the beaten path. I felt far more motivated to upgrade my stuff, improve, and keep playing past the credits in this game than I ever did in the 2018 one. One negative I will cite is actually getting around these areas, and fully completing them can be a huge pain. I found it perfectly fine to get everything in Midgard, Helheim, Jotunheim, Muspelheim, Svartalfheim, and Alfheim, but in ones like Vanaheim, oh boy. I would search around for 20 minutes to get to an area just for the game to reveal that I had to instead change the time of day, which I couldn't do without traveling to a completely different part of the map. It's an annoying, cumbersome mechanic when you actually try to get everything in the realm, and I wish they had just added more spots where you could do this, specifically more spots to change the time in appropriate locations. There's far more variety in how you do move around, since you can grapple using the blades outside of combat as well, and in certain realms you have this cool dog sled, but there's still a bit too much reliance on the boat for you to travel around realms like Vanaheim and Svartalfheim for my liking. I think they could have made you move the damn thing a little bit faster, or just made it easier to get around on foot, since that's 100 times more fun than the boat. I'm also not a fan of how you're required to collect lore to get 100%. But if that's the level of insignificance that my complaints are reaching, then you know this game does a pretty damn good job. The puzzles and mechanics are generally very sound and sometimes legitimately challenging if you try to go for all of the Nornir and legendary chests. But this beautiful, cinematic, and tough but fair combat system is truly what defines the gameplay of Ragnarok and makes it such a phenomenal experience. In terms of gameplay pacing, it's also very solid, since the beginning, middle, and end are all super exciting, and though there are clear high points like the Nidhogg boss fight, which may very well be the second greatest in video game history, the entire game never dips down too far on the excitement, artistry, intrigue, and variety. You're really encouraged to push yourself further and further at your own pace, which I love. The difficulty balancing issues of the last game are gone, reduced to atoms here, since there was practically no encounter in the main story that I find myself absolutely despising, but rather a truckload of hard but engaging fun and creative fights. There is no equivalent to the godforsaken dark elf fight between the realms, in case you were wondering. And in general, they've also destroyed the other main issue with the last game, namely the mini-bosses. There are so many, I mean so many of these things to fight, and they're all so damn cool. None are actively infuriating, but continue to wow me with the scale of the battles against them and the pure insanity of their designs. A giant dog in Helheim that smashes its chains into you, a weird deer woman who will beat the ever-loving crap out of you with her hooves, 2 Valkyries at once, and, of course, the God of Thunder. That's just barely scratching the surface of what this game has to offer without spoiling anything, so get yourself ready for a wild ride. Briefly, I want to discuss spoilers, so skip ahead about 15 seconds or to this timestamp real quick if you haven't beaten the game yet. To summarize what I think of the spoiler-filled parts of the game, let me just say that Brock's death made me legitimately cry. Atreus' gameplay is very fun and unique, and though the segment where he meets Angrboda for the first time is far too long, it ends with a great boss fight against her grandma, and that amazing moment where you're running as the wolf. And the Odin fight is also one of the best I've ever played. Okay, now we're back to non-spoiler territory, now that I've gotten that out of my system. If I had one more small issue, it's that the fast travel system is still way too cumbersome, and though I understand certain adjustments being made to stop loading screens from appearing and keep the flow going, plus the fact that this is a PS4 game too is clear, but I still think the method of games like Ghost of Tsushima, Breath of the Wild, or Horizon to just click on an icon on the map and warp right there is far, far better. But now let's finish by talking about the story. Now, the story of the last game was pretty incredible due to how well it used a simple concept to really dig into interesting themes by fleshing out specific characters. It's kind of exactly like The Last of Us, but that's far from a bad thing. Ragnarok has a similar tactic where its themes are mostly explored by the characters, but this time around there's a much larger cast to consider, and yet they all have an arc, and if I'm being perfectly candid, I don't think a single one of them is bad. From Thor's daughter and the conflict caused by her father's insurmountable grief after the deaths of Magni and Modi causing her to feel uncertainty around every corner, to Kratos slowly feeling the inescapable nature of fate and falling back into his old habits, there is nothing here to complain about for me. It's one of the best video game stories of all time. Themes of war are far more prevalent here, which feels a bit appropriate for a game called, well, God of War, and I think Kratos' specific emotions toward his son growing and changing is pulled off extremely well. He begins to learn that he must learn things from his son, not that his son is simply without anything to show or teach. Friendship and love become less alien to him once again, and instead of a journey out of grief for one person, he has one that grows to become much more maturely justified. He once again wants to do something entirely for the sake of one member of his family, this time Atreus, but gradually it becomes clear that every person in these realms has their own story to be told, their own emotions that matter, and their own potential waiting to be unlocked by the cruel and simultaneously liberating nature of fate, leading him and the player to fully understand the value that they all have. It does truly remind me of other fantastic stories such as Horizon Forbidden West, wherein the value of every single person must be added to our main character, causing them to function as part of a larger, inspiring movement toward good, rather than simply an isolated story. That's truly a brilliant basis for these stories in my opinion, because experiencing a fantastical world and simultaneously a narrative all about its inhabitants fleshes said world out while also making the tale being told feel so much grander and more meaningful. It's those emotional highs, those plot lines and sayings that come full circle that make this truly exceptional. This adventure that we've been brought on through these two games never fails to feel satisfying and complete, specifically through the process of giving every main character a compelling arc. There is a much stronger connection between them and the player, which is always important. Family is another theme that gets built upon alongside sacrifice and war. These all go hand in hand as, through the value and love that family shows us, we realize the horror of war and conflict. And once we understand the value of an even larger family, we understand that sacrifice is sometimes a necessary undertaking. The desperation caused by a true love for one can end up causing more pain for others than we could ever know, and even for ourselves if we can't learn to accept the inevitability of change and death. It is important to love deeply, but as Kratos' late wife says, it is just as inescapable to, as a result, grieve painfully. Pain and love are connected with one another, but experiences continue no matter what. And after so much crazy stuff in this story, Mimir's stories, Kratos' blunt remarks, and the charming nature and humanity of all these often non-human characters still brought a reassuring smile to my face. Even in the most uncertain of times, we'll always have a link back to the core of what makes us who we are. As the sheer, pure scale of this game weighed down on me, I couldn't help but understand its level of quality. It is Infinity War and Endgame in one video game, with so many insightful character interactions, incredible lines, beautiful sights, charming people to connect with, tremendous spectacle, earth-shaking performances, masterful writing, and infinitely entertaining combat and world building. God of War Ragnarok is not just another amazing video game. It's not just another masterpiece. It's one of the greatest achievements in the history of gaming that demonstrates the true artistic value of mixing beauty, technological prowess, cinematic power, thematically impactful storytelling, and addictive gameplay into one big pot of nothing but art. Even though no game is without its issues, this game brushes them off to show the passion surging through every single one of its veins in a truly breathtaking display.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this massive gargantuan video, my longest ever, I believe. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the success that the God of War Part 2 video has had. It's become one of my most viewed videos of all time in an extremely quick time period, so that's great. Also, Parallel 2 Chapter 3 is out now if you want to check that out. And next week, I'll be reviewing the Uncharted franchise with a compilation of my Uncharted 1 through 4 reviews from last year, alongside a brand new review of Uncharted The Lost Legacy. So I hope you're looking forward to that a week from today. A week from today, Parallel 2 Chapter 4 will also be out. But I want to get down to brass tacks and rank the God of War games, as I've just reviewed them all for you. So what's my final ranking? Well, at the very bottom, we have God of War Ascension. As I said in my review, I don't like that game. I think it's straight up bad. Above that, we have God of War Chains of Olympus, which is an alright game, but really nothing special. Then we have the first God of War. Yeah, it's, as I went into in my review, it's got a lot going for it, but it just doesn't really hold up that well today, but it's still, I guess, worth going through. Then above that, I would probably put God of War Ghost of Sparta, great game, and then above that, God of War 2018, also a great game. And then we get into the masterpiece territory, the final three. This is where it's really hard to rank them. Ragnarok, God of War 2, and God of War 3. I love all of these games. I think they're all masterpieces. But I think for now, the ranking I'm going to go with is God of War 2, then God of War 3, and then Ragnarok. I still think Ragnarok is the best one. Just the story and the gameplay, all of it is so amazing, and I'm sure some people much prefer the older games, and that's cool too, but I like Ragnarok the most. But hey, I understand why you like the old ones, because I just went through all of them, and some of them, like God of War 2, God of War 3, and Ghost of Sparta, are truly great. So yeah, thank you all for watching once again. What's your ranking if you've played all the God of War games? And be safe, and goodbye.